There are a few tribes of people throughout history who have never encountered the outside world. Number 1 is scary.
Number 10, Pintu P9. These are some of the most famous uncontacted people of all time. In the year 1984, their traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle collided with the modern world in a meeting of civilizations 40,000 years apart. Living in the remote Gibson Desert near Kiwirrkurra in the Australian outback, this group of 2 women and 7 children survived by traveling from watering hole to watering hole and eating rabbits, lizards, and bush food plants. Then one day, one of the young men of the lost tribe was out hunting when he saw a campfire and walked over to ask for water. The others, who were also of Aboriginal descent but lived in modern society, were terrified. One young man pulled out a gun and fired it into the air, and everyone scattered. Later, with the help of a search party, the Pintu P9 were found and brought in for medical examination.
The first time they encountered Europeans, they later recalled, they thought that white people were ghosts or evil spirits.
Finding members of their extended family who had come in from the desert years earlier, the older members of the Pintu P9 were shocked. They thought the other groups had died and now found them enjoying the comforts of modern life. Everything from television to ice cream to automobiles was foreign to these folks. Now settled down in Kiwirrkurra and Alice Springs, 2 settlements deep in the Australian interior, the family says that they would not go back. The brothers are all well-regarded painters with successful careers as Indigenous artists. Their previous nomadic life was incredibly hard and dangerous, with the search for water proving a constant struggle. But they mention one man, a warrior who still lived deep in the desert. Perhaps there are more uncontacted Aborigines out there. Number 9, WAPA Shana. There were multiple tribes within this ethnic group native to southern Guyana, but more recently only a select few have chosen to remain completely cut off from modern civilization. Originally contacted in the time of Christopher Columbus, the group used to practice polygamy, but Catholic priests pressured them to accept monogamous marriage as the norm.
Now, only a small fringe group of fewer than 100 people lives uncontacted at the edge between Guyana and Brazil in the Acarai Mountain.
Number 8, Toa Mona. This group of indigenous people lives in northwestern Bolivia in a special protected portion of the Madidi National Park, which was created in 2006 to protect their safety and right to privacy. Originally the subject of legend, this group was said to be protected by vicious warrior women with no fear of death and no mercy in killing.
They were supposed to be guarding a massive store of sealed away gold left over from the Incas.
In more recent years, a biologist, Lars Hafskjold, actually disappeared while searching for the Toa Mona people, and no outsider has ever seen them. In fact, we only know of their existence because other indigenous people of the area have mentioned contacting the Toa Mona on the banks of the Manurini River, and that they wanted to be left alone. Number 7, Man of the Hole. This might be the most mysterious man on the list. Known as the Man in the Hole, the lone survivor, and the loneliest man on Earth, this indigenous Native American lives alone in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, and no record of his name, tribe, or language exists today. Sadly, the rest of his tribe was most likely killed in fighting with loggers or illegal ranchers, and he's been described as a survivor of a genocide. In every home that he's been observed to inhabit, he leaves deep 6-foot holes around as either traps for animals, hiding places for him in times of danger, or spiritually significant markers. He's been attacked as recently as 2009 by illegal poachers, but has been recorded by drones as healthy and stable in 2018. The Brazilian Agency for Indians, or FUNAI, has left him gifts of tools or seeds, which he has accepted. They have also carved out an area of 11.5 square miles for this man and made it off-limits to all others.
If he ever decides to integrate with the modern world, his land grant will make him a wealthy man.
It seems he knows he is being watched, but is content to live out his solitary days following the traditions of his people. Number 6. Yanomami. Like the WAPA Shana, a small sliver of the group has chosen to hide out in the Amazon rainforest and avoid contact with the Western world. Of the 35,000 or more members of the ethnic group, only a few hundred are still isolated, hunting and gathering, foraging and migrating based on soil fertility, and escaping danger. Those who live in isolation live in the area of the upper Maraua River on the border between Brazil and Venezuela. Early research into their culture showed that the Yanomami people lived with a large amount of warfare and violence, with upwards of half of the men dying in some violent manner. The encroachment of white people on their territory likely led to even more intense conflict within the tribe and towards poachers and miners.
It's probably best to continue leaving these people alone.
Number 5. Lacandon. These are the last surviving uncontacted people of Mexico. Living in the Yucatan Peninsula deep in the jungle, they are the descendants of a group of Maya people who isolated themselves back in the 1600s. They still worship the same pantheon of gods as their ancestors from centuries ago. In a way, they are the closest group we have to modern-day Mayans. They still make traditional bows and arrows with handmade arrowheads, though they did begin getting into contact with the modern world during the 20th century. Now, some of their traditional art and craft is for sale, though they have less use for money than most, as they still live off the land for the majority of their needs. In 1971, Mexican President Luis Echevarria signed a special order declaring a large swath of the jungle property of the Lacandon and forbidding settlement or logging there.
Nowadays, their traditional way of life is under attack, and it may not be long before there are no Lacandon people left who live as their ancestors once did.
Number 4. Corubo. Living in the vast Brazilian state of Amazonas, this group is hostile to any attempts to contact them from the outside world. Though some neighboring communities of indigenous people have had contact with the Corubo, they are mostly violent encounters, and these people are best left alone. Much of what the outside world knows about them comes from a single Brazilian explorer's research, Sidney Pozuelo. There are 2 groups, the larger of which has had violent or even deadly encounters with 7 different workers who tried to establish peaceful contact. As recently as 2000, Corubo warriors killed workers who were trespassing on their land. Now, all we know about them is that there is a community of 100 to 300 people living in long houses, and they use clubs and poison darts as their weapons of choice. Even this is just from drone footage, as Brazil has stopped letting researchers attempt to study the group.
The Corubo are not to be trifled with.
Number 3. Uru'eu Wow Wow. This name is memorable, and so are the people. There are a number of tribes within the group that have been contacted by the outside world and live in villages near the Brazil-Bolivia border. All that we know about the uncontacted groups is that loggers and gold seekers have been killed when they stumbled upon the tribes. Now, their territory is under attack by ranchers, so it makes sense that they would fight back.
If your homeland was being invaded by people who cut down all the trees and started fires, you'd be pretty angry too.
Number 2. AShe. This is the last surviving uncontacted Native American man. AShe, who lived in the late 18 and early 1900s, was a member of the Yahi people of California. He was a survivor of the tragic California genocide of the various indigenous groups who lived there in the late 1800s. In 1911, at the age of 50, AShe walked down out of the foothills near Lassen Peak in Northern California and right into the white man's world. It's a tragic story. In fact, his name, AShe, literally means man in his own language. The culture of the Yahi people demanded that a person not speak his own name until introduced by another. When AShe was asked his name, he simply said, "I have none, for there are no people to name me." His life was one of turmoil. After his tribe was massacred in 1865, 33 of the 70 members escaped. Then aggressive ranchers and cattle owners killed half of the survivors, and the remainder hid for the next 40 years. In 1908, after years on the run in the mountains, a group of surveyors found the last 4 uncontacted American Indians in a small camp. They fled, and the surveyors stole everything they could from the camp. AShe's sister, mother, and uncle all died, and he was alone in the wilderness. For 3 years, the man survived, only being caught in 1911 while foraging for meat in Oroville, California.
He became a cultural sensation as the last wild Indian of America, but modern culture did not agree with him.
He had no immunity to things like smallpox and influenza, and passed away after 5 years of on and off illness of tuberculosis in 1916. During the last portion of his unhappy life, AShe was able to record the story of his life, his people, his language, and his traditions, which has been saved in the Library of Congress. His tool-making techniques are legendary, as he was the last isolated Native American to share his method of making arrowheads. His memory lives on in films and books about his legacy.
There are dozens of uncontacted tribes in the world, but we still got one left. But first, if you like this video, be sure, click thumbs up, click subscribe, and speak up in the comments. Would you want to live in an isolated tribe away from modern civilization? Who would you pick to join you in your tribe?
Number 1, Sentinelese. This is it. These are the archetypal violent natives. The group, numbering up to 200 individuals, is the most famous tribe of isolated people living on an island in the Bay of Bengal, east of India and west of Myanmar. They are protected by the Indian government, which actually maintains a patrol of the surrounding ocean with armed sailors to ensure that outsiders are not allowed on the island. Why? Not only is it because indigenous people have the right to be left alone, but because they have no resistance to Western diseases. Something as simple as measles could be epidemic among the small group. For their own protection, as well as in accordance with their wishes, their island is protected and isolated. Unlike some of the other tribes or people on this list, the Sentinelese have never allowed peaceful contact with outsiders. Multiple attempts have been made by various groups, whether religious missionaries or anthropological explorers. None of them have succeeded. The people themselves have been described as short, with dark skin, good teeth, and strong muscles. How is this known? The Indian government has run boats around the island, looking for any people who show up on the shore, and counted them as part of the census of the country.
After all, even hostile, isolated tribes of people still count towards the census.
This tribe has been described as living with Stone Age technology, with some researchers speculating that they have lived uncontacted for 60,000 years. Despite great upheavals like the Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004, this tribe has remained resilient and strong. In fact, the most recent time they were in the news was when a foolish and stubborn missionary attempted to contact them and convert them, despite it being illegal. The missionary, John Allen Chow, attempted multiple times to get the Sentinelese to communicate with him, handing over gifts and bringing a Bible. But they were hostile and eventually shot him with an arrow and killed him. The fishermen who smuggled Chow onto the island were arrested for illegal trespassing, but the Sentinelese were not prosecuted. After all, they saw the missionary as an unwanted invader. Let that be a lesson. Don't bother people who don't want to be bothered.